them, and they you can go to ouramericanvalues.org to find out more. Ouramericanvalues.org. Gary, how are you today?
Good, Tim. How are you guys?
Doing well, man. What did you think about what I just preached?
I was on the edge of my seat here, but I also found myself
as most people
praying
were.
that a few of those miracles would make their way to Washington, where we really need them.
There you go. I hear you, brother. Me too. What do the Republicans do now? Because we're at a crossroads. It seems to me we're at a tipping point with respect to this IRS investigation. Because Lois Lerner, the person in charge of the IRS, has said, "I ain't talking to you." And the Republican in charge of finding out what happened here says you're going to have to. Well, so what happens?
Look, she needs to be found in contempt of Congress, which would be completely normal and appropriate to do under these circumstances. And if you're found in contempt of Congress and you still refuse to answer questions, you can literally be arrested. So, look, I actually believe that before this is over, and this is just a personal opinion, but I believe when all the facts are out, she could end up doing jail time, whether she's found in contempt of Congress or not. So I understand why she's taking the Fifth Amendment and refusing to answer questions, but they can't let it go on. The abuse of power going on in Washington right now toward over half the country is so over the top that it behooves the Republicans, even though they only have the House of Representatives, to use every tool that is available to them under the Constitution to get this at least somewhat under control.
I'll tell you what's going on out there among people who typically vote Republican as well. This is going on across the country, and we've seen evidence of it in the last couple of election cycles. And that is people who are conservative, who see what you've talked about, Gary, are sick and tired of the establishment Republicans who've been there maybe forever, and they just rock along, get along with the Democrats, don't fight back, and don't show any fire in their belly, so people who are conservative, and that makes up the majority of people in the Republican Party, at least the voters out there, are saying, you know what? If it means we gotta vote somebody out who's been there for 5 terms, then that's what we're going to do, because we need fighters up there in Washington D.C. We don't need guys who are up there to collect a salary and a pension
and play golf at the country club.
Play golf at the country club and just act like we don't have enough votes, so we can't do anything. I know the political reality is you got to have enough votes to do certain things, but you can also show a little, like I said, fire in the belly.
And I'll say this. I'm also okay with some compromises up. I'm not saying you have to be a hardliner on every issue.
Not everything.
It's my way or the highway. But on issues, my goodness, issues like this, the abuse of power.
You think the Democrats?
Going on,
you think the Democrats as well would be concerned about this and wanting to? So anyway, Gary, you want to speak to what's going on? There's a little. Is it outright war in the Republican Party? Is it kind of under the surface?
It's a simmering guerrilla war, I guess, is the best way to put it. I mean, there's clearly some stresses and strains in the party. When the Cold War ended, basically the definition of conservative that we all agreed on kind of ended with the Cold War. The one thing that brought everybody in the coalition together was opposition to communism. And when the Soviet Union fell, then that thing that bound together libertarians, values voters, economic conservatives, etc., wasn't there anymore. And now some of the divisions among us are more apparent, and there's more infighting. I continue to believe, as frustrating as it is, though, that nobody has shown us a better coalition to get 51% of the vote. And I go back to that three-legged stool, that's made up of economic conservatives who want lower taxes and smaller government, defense conservatives that want a strong American presence, defending our own national security and then defending liberty around the world when we're able to do so, and often we're not. And then third, the values voters, people that are pro-life, believe marriage is between a man and a woman, believe in religious liberty. Even though we have differences among us, if we get all the major things that each of us believe in, that's still 51% plus of the country, and it's the only way I can see of beating the left, which is made up of the pro-abortion people, the pro-gay rights people, the university crowd, heavy votes from some minorities, and feminists, etc. So in a narrowly divided country, this is probably the politics we're stuck with. But I certainly understand how frustrating it is to people.
Gary, I don't want to go all, black helicopter / Area 51 on you here, but what do you think of the idea that the reason perhaps that the Republicans have not hit harder at this IRS abuse of power, potential abuse of power issue is because establishment Republicans don't like the Tea Party groups anyway, and they kind of hope the IRS does their dirty work for them?
I've heard that, and gosh, I mean, if things are that bad,
Wow.
we really do have a problem. I'm a little skeptical. Look, I mean, I don't know any Republican, even the ones that are dim-witted, convincing themselves that the IRS is only going to give the Tea Party trouble. I mean, there's plenty of examples out there of how the IRS has been used.
Well, there were other conservative groups targeted too. It wasn't just Tea Party
And
groups.
individuals,
Yes,
sure.
and individuals, yeah.
And certainly the Koch brothers, who are more libertarian, can tell you that they have more than their fair share of trouble from the IRS, whereas a guy like George Soros, the big leftist billionaire, he gets off scot-free. So I hope no Republican is short-sighted enough to think that, well, the IRS is going to take care of the Tea Party and get rid of that little irritation for them. And then suddenly Republicans will be able to rein in the IRS.
Yeah.
Hey, Gary, switching to international affairs, I know you cover that some in your daily emails that we get.
Yes.
I get from you. And I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, Ed and I, we're about in Pat Buchanan's camp on this stuff. Now, maybe you probably aren't, but I mean, I'm just reading stuff like what's going on in the Ukraine with Russia. I'm going, that's none of our business. I don't want any. You know what I'm saying? It's just none of our business, and I don't want to get involved in that.
In terms of getting involved with boots on the ground
Well,
and stuff
any
like
kind of military action, I
Yeah.
just say. But now we're part of NATO, so we have our obligations there. Is that short-sighted, or how do you feel about this kind of stuff?
Now, do you really expect me, Tim, to tell the co-host of the show I'm on?
That's why I
that they're
told
being
you ahead of time.
short-sighted?
You can gracefully tell me how I'm wrong. You don't have to just jump out there and slap me around. So.
Well, look, I mean, nobody, right or left, is recommending any kind of military action. But, Tim, let me tell you where I think you might want to take another look at this.
That was very good, Gary.
Yes, it was.
Excellent.
In the Middle East, there are voices now, always on the left, but voices on the right saying, you know what, just don't be involved in the Middle East. Well, that means that a nuclear-armed Iran is going to run into the Middle East. In this situation in Ukraine, if Putin gets away with this, you can write this down, date and time. You will see Russian troops in the next few years enter Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, even Poland will be in danger. You will see the Soviet Empire rebuilt and Russia dominating Europe. Likewise, in the Pacific, there's a growing China. We're going to find ourselves more and more dealing with provocations and aggression and threats against our allies like Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines. A world in which China dominates the Pacific, Russia dominates Europe, Iran dominates the Middle East, all because we're tired of getting involved, is a world in which America and our future will be very much in doubt.
So what should we do about this situation?
We've got to be smart. We've got to pick our fights. We've got to have presidents, unlike the one we've got now, that the rest of the world says to themselves, wow, we crossed this guy. we're going to be in deep trouble. Putin moved on Ukraine, in my view, because he feared absolutely nothing from Obama. There's all kinds of things the president could do. He could pull the visas of the Russian billionaires that are running all over Florida with money that's probably obtained by ill-gotten, ill-conceived means. Boot their butts out. Send a message that we could have helped Ukraine long before these last couple of weeks with some well-spent economic aid that would have made it much less likely that the Ukrainian government that's been kicked out would have been so pro-Russian. Look, America's a great country. Even with all of our problems, we have levers, and we need to use them, or we're going to find ourselves isolated. And in that kind of a world, economically, the ability of Russia, Iran, China to harm us will be overwhelming, and it will be in a very weak position to do anything about it.
So you're of the opinion that whether America is, I think America is still the lone superpower despite attempts to slash and gut the military. The fact that we are is just where history put us, and so we need to be that. That's what you're saying. Nobody else can do it.
But I'm suggesting wisdom, which has been missing in all of this. For example, if we're ever facing something where we have to commit combat men, not in Ukraine, but, the world, history goes on, so there's likely to be crises where we're going to have to do that. The next time we do it, get a declaration of war from the Congress so everybody knows that this is something serious. Again, I'm not talking about Ukraine. I'm talking about some future situation like Iraq or Afghanistan. Get a declaration of war, and then when you send young men and women into combat, don't make them carry, along with a 60-pound backpack, 100 pounds of political correctness from the ACLU and the left. Tell them, we're in a war, go over and win it, do whatever you have to do, and then we're going to bring you home.
Right.
So I think, we've got to be willing to do that when it's appropriate, but we can't keep fighting no-win wars in which people lose their sons and daughters, men come home without arms and legs, and we don't win the wars because the left gets to decide what the rules are.
Yeah. Well, I have a little more pessimistic view than a lot of people. I don't think you can win wars in the Middle East. Unless you change their religion, they're going to stay the same as they have been for how many hundreds and thousands of years?
Well, in terms of Muslims, since the 600s.
You're not going to change Afghanistan. And you might change Iraq for a little while, but they're going to revert back to, because Islam dominates that region of the world, and Islam doesn't allow for Western-style democracies to exist, Jeffersonian constitutional principles. They don't even know what that is. You know what I'm saying? It's whoever has more guns.
Right.
And it's always been that way. So go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, but it depends on the kind of war, right? We bombed the downtown Baghdad for 2 weeks with a shock and awe campaign after we warned them that we were going to do so. So the buildings were empty. I take this all the way back to Bush. We could have gone in and knocked out the Iraqi military capability from the air and never send troops in if that was our decision. Would it have solved the problem? No, but Iraq would have been in no position to cause anybody trouble for a long time. There are things you can do when you've got the kind of power we do that are better than committing men on the ground who are hamstrung with all these ridiculous rules.
Yeah, for a decade or more. Yeah, the nation building thing just doesn't work.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Completely.
And now you may argue, well, it worked somewhat in Germany and Japan, but you're talking
those were Western countries.
Yes, you're talking about totally different cultures.
Germany was.
Germany had a Christian background in their history, but you're talking about totally different when you enter into a Islamic dominated country. Go ahead.
And in Germany and Japan, we won the war totally.
Well, that's true.
We crushed our enemies,
surrender.
and then we were in a position to demand all kinds of things. In the wars we've been in lately, we don't allow our men and women to win completely, and because we don't let them do that, we're in no position to decide what kind of peace there will be.
Well, isn't traditionally down through human history, when you win a war, you take over a country,
That's
Or you
exactly
take what you
right.
want and then
or
go
you
home.
take what you want. I mean, you won.
Yeah.
So, but we don't do that. Now, I'm not suggesting that we should. I'm
Right.
just saying that's the way the world has worked for thousands of years until America came along and said, you know what, we don't want your country,
And we'll help you build it back.
and we'll spend our money to help you knock out your tyrant, and
Right.
we'll rebuild your country.
Well, look, I'll tell you how retrograde I am. I was furious when George Bush